Jamilah Thompkins-Bigelow. I write children's books, and I write children's books centering my community. So really Black Muslim children. I tell stories that are authentic to us. And I am an educator too, as well. So I'm always kind of thinking about that piece.
Right. So what was your journey to becoming an author? Like you said, I knew you were an educator. I didn't realize that you actually haven't been writing children's books for very long.
Well, that's always a funny question because, it takes so long for books to get published. So I started writing in 2015, children. Yeah. But I was a school teacher. So I taught high school English, middle school English, for about 10 full years. And then I was working in a community center teaching kids of all ages how to write and doing, fun programs, creative writing with them. And at the same time, I was writing children's books. And I think with Mommy's Khimar, it really was, I got connected to Zareen Jaffrey, the editor at the time of Salam Reads. And I sent in my picture book. And I started writing children's books really because I had my own kids at the time. They were very young. And I just saw like there was an absence of children's books that, really were relevant to their experience that they could see themselves in. So I was like, you know what, I want to just start writing my own books that have their experience in it. But I had gotten my first book deal back in 2016, but my first book wasn't published in 2018. And that's just kind of how, even though it was, accepted for publication in 2016, it takes a couple of years
right
off the ground. So it feels like I've been doing this for a really long time, but I've been published, my first publications in 2018.
And like you said, I was really struck by the fact that this came out of such a need that you saw a need and you thought, okay, well, if I don't see these books, I'm going to write them. Most of us just complain, but you actually went and did something about it. That's wonderful.
Yeah. The thing too is that for one, I do like to do that, like jump into fights. But the other thing is that I loved children's books. I discovered that through my kids and through being a teacher too, because I love reading like middle grade books and things like that and YA. But I also discovered I really love picture books. And so when I started thinking about it, I was like, hey, I really love these books. I read these books after my kids have read the books,
right.
Out children's books. And I'm like, you guys, you want this, don't you? You want to read this book? And my kids would not be interested. And I'd be like, well, and I realized there might be an interest in children's books. And so I should, try it out. And, here I am because I tried it out and had fun.
Well, I've actually talked to a number of teachers who say that even if they teach older grades, they still love to use picture books. There's something about picture books that's really special. Like you said, I'm sure I'm going to read them even when my kids are older because they're just really beautiful and they're a great way to get across a concept in kind of a quick, really powerful, impactful way. You said that you aspire to be a griot. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I've read it before. I don't know if I've actually said it right. But for those that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about what that is and why that's important to you?
Yeah, and sometimes I'm like unsure because so I know it's the French word, right? So griot or griot, feminine, it actually does. But the word really, from West Africa is a jali, or jali muso, right? And that's someone who passes on stories, passes on communities' stories, their history. They use music to do this as well. And so I just hope that I can be a community storyteller. That's the big piece for me when I say that. And I love the music of words. So that's why when I think about it, I'm like, you know what? I want to be I want to be a Jali. I want to be a Jali Muso, because it's just a beautiful, beautiful tradition. And I'm a little bit, I'm inspired too, because my mother is from West Africa. So she comes from this tradition, and even people in her family, not directly, but in that family, like there is a tradition of people who are griots. So.
That's wonderful. And that actually ties right into your picture book, Your Name is a Song, which is actually the first one that I had come across of yours, because you talk about the music of words. That's such a beautiful way to have kids think about their names and how to explain their names to people. And for those who don't know, it's a take on the problem that a lot of kids have of people mispronouncing their names, especially even teachers who we think would take more time to get it right. So was that something that happened to you as a child, or what inspired that book?
So, I mean, that was something that had happened to me as a child, but not as much as I know a lot of people who had that experience from, within my community, right? So, including my brother, even, my name was butchered. My name was butchered as well a few times. So it's almost like a normal experience growing up that not be able to say your name. But then I also was inspired by my experiences as a teacher. And with Your Name as a Song is actually inspired, the inspiration comes from one student that I had, and he was like in 11th grade at the time. And he had his first name was mispronounced by almost everyone in the school. So everyone called him like by this shortened nickname. And I was familiar with the name, so I was pronouncing his first name correctly, but I was like one of the few people. And one day he told me his full name. It's a Nigerian name, and his middle name is Olumide. And the whole name together just flowed like a song. It was just really beautiful. You could tell the parents had had been very thoughtful about his name. And I remember thinking to myself, Olumide, like you can sing that. It's so beautiful. The sound is just lovely. And, at the time I had been writing children's books. And so I would sit down with ideas and words that stick out to me. And I remember I was writing Olumide, that name is a song. I wrote Your Name is a Song. And I said, Your Name is a Song. That would make kind of a cool title for a book. Yeah. That book out. And so I worked backwards and created all the characters. But his name was ultimately the inspiration for the song, for the book. Song has been to say. And actually, what's interesting is that the very first name that Mama says is Olumide. She says Olumide is a melody, and I really wanted to be the first name in the book because it was the name that kicked off the book, basically.
Does he know that?
He does not. And people ask me, like, do you know where he is? And I'm like, oh my goodness, because it was several years ago now.
Right.
Like, I don't even know where he is or located, and I don't have his first name in there, of course. But I would have to look him up, but I don't think he knows that he's the inspiration of this.
We'll have to find him. I'm sure he would love to hear that.
Yeah, and I teach some students, so so it's like I just need to find, where is he?
I mean, this book, it's interesting because it's written from the point of view of the child, which of course, because this is a children's book, but I was actually rereading it with my kids this morning. I mean, we've read it before, but I was reading it again with him. And one thing I was struck by was the teacher. Because at first the teacher is not a very sympathetic character. She actually seems kind of like overworked, kind of harassed, and not really sympathetic to even this idea when the girl comes to her and says, my name is a song, or that names are songs. So do you have any advice for teachers, or what would your message be for the teachers that might be listening about how they should approach saying their kids' names? Because I'm sure no matter how many languages you speak, when you get into the classroom, there are going to be kids' names that you've never seen before and, that you maybe don't know how to pronounce. What advice would you have for them?
Well, so I should say, with that, with this book, Your Name is a Song, I wrote it for kids, but I also wrote it for teachers too. Right. And it was sort of me. I don't know if it always comes across, but part of it is that I empathize with that teacher in this way, that I understand, I kind of showed her as being sort of impatient, like you said, she wasn't really with the idea. And the thing is, because when it comes to being a teacher, you have so much to do. You have so much on your mind. and you may think you for a sec you may like just disregard something because it's like there's so much going on.
Right.
I don't care about the kids necessarily, but I wanted to show that happening and that the teacher sort of changes her mind about disregarding this girl's name, because I think that is one of the best things about teachers, is that they really can like learn from their students, and that a lot of them are in it for the right reasons. And so I guess my message would really be to teachers is just like, first of all, remember, why you're in the classroom, why you made the choice, because no one, gets into teaching because they want to be mean to kids. Like, that's not, we care about children. That's why we get into education. And so I think that's my big message, is that, when it's tough, when it's difficult, when you maybe need to do a little bit more work to understand a kid, to be able to say their name, just remember why it is that you're here. Why did you make this choice ultimately?
Right. Just switching gears a little bit, I saw an interview with Toni Morrison where she said that even when she was writing stories about Black characters, she got a lot of pressure to write for white audiences, kind of explaining Black lives to white audiences. And you said that you've kind of faced similar pressures, but you really tried to focus on who are the kids you're writing for, and then think about the Muslim kids, and especially Black Muslim kids, and write your stories for them. Do you feel like you still face a lot of those pressures, or now that you've had success with your books, do you feel like that's kind of, you've been able to make a little space where you can write how you want, or do you feel like you're still kind of face that kind of pressure to explain to kind of a mainstream audience?
I still feel that pressure. And it's not necessarily that someone is telling me that I have to write this way or whatever, but it's just a part of, it's internalized stuff within me, right? Like that feeling like that I always have to explain my existence, right? And having to push back, and the writing is really that pushing back against that internalized stuff. And Toni Morrison is really a guide for me with that, and she has like a statement. She says, I don't have the exact quote, but always pulling to your center, right? And that making the story your center. And so that's what I always try to hold on to, is that like my reality, my experiences are the center in my books, and I always pull to that center, and I have to push back against that urge inside to say, oh, let me make this more palatable or more understandable to some external gaze, when I'm like, no, my books are for young Black Muslim kids. And if I have to, sometimes I'm like, write the book that little Jamilah, when she was young, would love to have, and just focus on her. That is your audience as you're writing. But it's tough, it's difficult work.
Yeah, and I would think especially for writers that are just starting out, a lot of them do get that feedback that their work is too niche. Like there's not a big enough audience. And I think your books have proven, because they've been so successful, that kids, they're still interested in stories about kids that are different than them. They see like the commonalities. What do you have some advice for other people that want to start writing, but they're not really sure how to go about it, especially like if they're facing those same kind of pressures? Right.
And you're going to face those pressures, of that, you're a niche, right? You're too niche. And it doesn't necessarily have to be stated out loud, but you just, there's certain things that, you just take in as a writer. You understand that people have expectations that you're going to write to, this external gaze. And I think you always have to focus on your craft. And you also always have to, and within that, focusing on the emotional connection that you're making with readers. So no matter what, I write to my center, but I also think that through writing to my center, I'm trying to write to sort of a universal experience. And I guess universal meaning like they're like a universal emotional experience. Like I'm hoping that people can connect with the books, emotionally, whether they come from the same background or not at all, completely different background, that they still you know, see themselves in the little girls playing with her mommy's Khimars, you know, they still see their childhoods in there, or their kids can see that, right? And so it's just, you know, focusing on, you know your, you know, do your work, know your craft, know your work is good, right? Get it, you know, get it down, you know, focus on that emotional connection, that beauty of that work, so that you can feel a little bit more confident, like, you know, well, this is a very, you know, specific experience, you know, that maybe is not, you know, that has been historically excluded, that is not represented, right? But, you know, you're not going to tell me this is not a good story. You're going to, you know, or that people cannot connect with this story.
Did you feel nervous doing like a more traditional, I mean, going with a traditional publisher versus, because I've talked to a lot of authors that because they had gotten some of that feedback, they decided to self-publish or go with like a really small indie publishing. I mean, I'm sure there are advantages and disadvantages to both sides. Is that something you kind of worried about?
I worried about it a little bit. My whole thing is I always think about the access to the books. So my one worry about self-publishing is that a lot of self-published books are accessible to people who know to look for them, to know where to get them. But for like a child, like the way I grew up, you know, books, I got children's books from school, you know, from the school library, from school. And that was my access. And that was like, you know, huge for me. And so I think about that kid who really is not going to have access to these books. And I want them to be able to get a book from the free library, get it from their school. And I don't really see avenues for that, not on a large scale with self-publishing. So that's why I've kind of always felt like, I don't know if this is right for me.
Right.
You know, so that's why I kind of have stayed away from that track. Although I will say, like, there are some really great books coming out of, you know, self-publishing, you know, and, you know, that represent our community really well, my community really well. So I think have a wish that there was a way to make those a little bit more accessible to kids. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw an interview with Jason Reynolds the other night, and he was kind of he wasn't necessarily talking about the publication of books, but that for so many kids, really their access to children's books is through the school library. That they don't necessarily have money to go to the bookstore or even have a bookstore in their community. And even libraries, you know, the public library might not necessarily be in their community. It's always what's in that school library that's really accessible to them. And I feel like I have so many other questions I want to ask you, but we only have a few minutes, and I want to make sure you get to plug your new books that are coming out. I don't know if everybody knows about that. You have, so March, I think 2022, you have Abdul's story that's coming out, and then Salat in Secret and Hold Them Closer will be coming out later. Can you give us a little preview about those?
Sure. So Abdul's story, let me see if I can, I'm going to put the phone down for a second. So you can kind of see it, Abdul's story of this cover. And I just love the kids that are, the illustrations Tiffany Rose does. She really, like, you know, depicts, you know, a community of color in a really beautiful way. Let me see if I can find some of the kids that I just was like, these are really beautiful. It's falling apart, but you can kind of see them. So,
this is one of those, like the non-bound ones, copies.
Right. Yeah, so we're only on that at that stage now. But it's Abdul's story is really a story about a boy who needs to write his own story. That's why it's called that. Now there's more to it, right? So like, he is a child who doesn't, you know, who struggles with writing, who struggles with, you know, spelling, with his handwriting, with getting things right. And he likes things to be perfect, but he can't really do that through his writing. But he has such great stories to tell. And he doesn't really feel like his stories are even welcome in the classroom. So the book is really about him becoming confident about telling his own stories and seeing that his stories have value, even if they maybe there's some spelling mistakes, there's different things, that he could be a writer too, that his stories are valuable. So That's what Abdul's story is about. And
I'm sure you have such a great perspective on that because you were basically teaching kids like that, right? Then trying to get them to value their own stories.
Yeah, in fact, he's inspired by all my stories I steal from from my life experiences. So this is actually the inspiration came from a child who was struggling to feel like they could be a writer in a writing center I was working in, and then Hold Them Close, and we have a subtitle now for A Love Letter to Black Children, and that one is a book that I cried when I first wrote it. I sometimes cry when I read it because it was a really emotional book. I wrote this book back in 2019, and I just remember something had happened. And this is the sad part. I don't remember what. It was just in a moment of injustice. It was a moment of, someone Black had been brutalized, right? And I hurts me that I don't even remember what it was. Who was it? What happened then? But I remember I just started writing this poem, and I was crying writing the poem because I was thinking to myself, how do you make this like understandable for children? So I wrote this poem, and it's really about like holding close to happy moments and holding close to our history and our loved ones. In the face of like things like that, in the face of that kind of the violence. So that one's coming out next year as well. So I'm really, really excited to have that one come out. And the art is amazing. The art is from Patrick Doer, who is a fine artist, and he created art around the photography of Jamel Shabazz. So it's breathtaking to look at, and I'm kind of like, I'm hoping that I'll be able to read that book aloud, but I struggle with it a little bit, even though there's lots of joy in it, and there's but some moments, in that book. And should I go on? Do I do Salat in Secret as well? I'm just like kind of
sure, whatever you. I know we've gone over the time that I had told you, but if you're happy to stay, we're happy to keep on talking. I just want to be respectful of your time.
Sure. I have to go get my kids soon, but so Salat in Secret, that is a picture book about a boy who wants to. Salat is Muslim prayer, and he wants to pray 5 times a day. He's very into this. Learning this concept of praying 5 times a day. He just got a new Salat rug because he turned 7. A lot of kids get Salat rugs when they turn 7. And but the thing is, one of the prayers happens during the school day.
Right.
He's too shy to ask for a place to pray, so he is like trying to seek and find places to pray in the school. So that's a kind of a fun, sweet one that I hope people will also like.
Oh, I love it too, because like you said, that's something that I think, the Muslim kids reading that, I'm sure they will all be able to identify with. Yeah.
Right, because they know about, if they've ever had to pray in public, or if they know pray in public, or if they don't feel comfortable praying in public, so they all, I think a lot of kids were like, oh yeah, what do you do? Or do they have to, they make the choice to pray after school and pray their prayer late, but it's all kind of a connect. It's an experience a lot of, I think, most kids connect to. So,
someone who asked in the chat where they can get these books. Now, these are all books that haven't come out yet, but I know thank you for posting. Someone posted a link to the Amazon link for Abdul's story. Right. Are the other ones, they're not even out on Amazon yet, right?
Right. They're
further down.
You can kind of just, follow, like connect on, add them to your to be read list on Goodreads and so forth, and the once I know Hold Them Close should be not too long from now. It has a cover, so hopefully once the cover reveal comes out, then people can also pre-order that one. But Salat in Secret is not till 2023, so you're gonna have to wait.
Okay, we'll have to hold out for that one. I cannot tell you what a pleasure it has been to talk to you. Thank you so much. I know you're so